Hello everyone and welcome to another video by Falling Down the Rabbit Hole. As you can see, I am recording myself instead of just the table down shots that I usually do. It was my goal to not show myself on this channel, so I show myself on the main channel all the time, but I realized that not having to mic up when I show off the books is a lot easier, and this is a lot easier way to record, so I'm going to start doing the intros of the video like this and show the books a little later on in the video. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about the history of Japanese folk and fairy tales in English, which is a really interesting story, and it's a kind of a more modern story than you'd expect. The story starts back with the Grimms, when the Grimms released their fairy tales, and they started getting very, very popular, and then were translated into English and many different languages. They're kind of a fairy tale mania swept Europe and America, and because of that, you can see, like, the Grimms come out, and you can see many different countries start releasing books of fairy tales. Folklorists pop up all around after the Grimms. And there were, of course, folklorists before the Grimms. The Grimms aren't the beginning of fairy tales. But because of this, there was this huge desire for fairy tales going on through a large chunk of the 1800s and into the 1900s. So, the story of Japanese fairy tales start around the time that Commodore Perry and the black ships opened up Japanese trade to Western nations. This was followed in Japan by the Meiji Restoration, and the Meiji Restoration opened up Japan culturally to be very interested in the West, and there was this modernization that went on, this trading of cultural ideas between Japan and into Japan. And one of the things that people were excited about at this time was the idea of Japanese fairy tales, this market of fairy tales that people slowly realized was very vast and untapped. And the story of Japanese fairy tales in English starts with Hasegawa Takejiro, and he was a publisher, and he was smart and started in the Meiji Restoration publishing books that were in foreign languages about Japan, and very quickly learned that this was very lucrative. A lot of people were very interested in learning about Japan. So in 1885, he started a series of books called the Japanese Fairy Tale Series. And what these were tiny little books that each had one fairy tale in them. And they were printed on this, they call it crepe paper. And I had one of these, and man, do I wish I still did. Everybody has those things they've sold in their lives that they really, really regret. And mine is that I had one of these Japanese fairy tale series from the 1880s that was made out of this very strong crepe paper that is impossible for me to describe. It's very thick paper, but it also feels like fabric. It's very interesting. But I sold it. I was offered $200 for my little book, and I could not resist that at the time, so I sold it. And now I regret it. So in 1885, he released 6 fairy tales. The first one was Momotaro, which is, of course, one of the most famous of the Japanese fairy tales in English. Kind of similar to Thumbelina, this little tiny boy is born from a peach, and it is his story. That was followed by The Tongue-Cut Sparrow, another very popular Japanese fairy tale. And then The Battle of the Monkey and the Crab, The Old Man Who Made the Dead Trees Blossom, and Kachikachi Mountain. And finally, The Mouse's Wedding. And all of these were translated by a man named David Thompson, who was a missionary there in Japan at the time. So that was really the first kind of translations that started occurring of Japanese fairy tales into English. And they would sell these tiny little crepe books to tourists stopping there in Japan. Well, that first 6 proved to do very well. So Hasegawa hired some more translators. And the 7th book that he did was called The Old Man and the Devils, which is the one that I had. And it was translated by James Curtis Hepburn. And Hepburn was a missionary, but he also invented the original transliteration of Japanese into the Latin alphabet. And we start to see that he was hiring from this particular group of, I guess we call them expats that were living there in Japan at the time. Because right after this, he did Urashima, the Fisher Boy, and this was translated by Basil Hall Chamberlain. And Basil Hall Chamberlain, of course, is one of the most important early Japanese translators. And this is some of the first translation work that he did. After that, he also hired Kate James, who was the first female Japanese translator. And as it went on, Lafcadio Hearn also joined in and started doing translations for some of these books. Although with Lafcadio Hearn, it's interesting. We don't know if every one of these stories were actually translated or if some of them were written by Lafcadio Hearn, or maybe many pieces of different tales were put together into one tale by Lafcadio Hearn. But yeah, these tales did amazingly well. People were very much into these little crepe books. There was tons of infighting that went on. Lafcadio Hearn, I don't think, liked the crepe paper that was being used, and all of these were illustrated by different Japanese artists. And people, of course, loved those illustrations. And the translators, of course, would push for more and more illustrations. Wonderful little books. And the first time that the West was really able to experience Japanese fairy tales. So that series went on till about 1903. But, of course, there was still quite a demand for Japanese folk and fairy tales. So we see releases. I think the next really big one would be Kaidan by Lafcadio Hearn. And of course, this is more famous as a ghost story book than a fairy tale book. I would say this is a ghost/folk tale book, but it did bring a lot of stories to the West from Japan. And I just want to show off this copy, which is the first book I ever bought in Japan. I was in Japan when I bought this and was very excited about it. And the cool thing about this is that this cover is one of the covers from those original crepe books. Very, very cool. The next important person in fairy tale translation, probably more important specifically to fairy tales than Lafcadio Hearn, just because Lafcadio Hearn was more interested in the kind of folk and horror tales, is Yae Theodora Ozaki. And Yae Theodora Ozaki had a very interesting life. I highly recommend you go check her out. Her Wikipedia page gives an overview of her life. And yeah, she lived a very interesting life. She was half Japanese, half English, spent time in both England and in Japan, and at a very young age started getting interested in translating stories and fairy tales. And she released a book in 1903 that was called Japanese Fairy Tales. And this is probably the book that has most influenced Japanese fairy tales in English-speaking Western countries. And it includes many of them that were in the original Japanese fairy tale series, but you didn't have to collect all the little books. They were all in one book, and it includes many more than that. And in my opinion, if you are interested in reading a book of Japanese fairy tales, this is the one to get. This is the one to get. It's really wonderful. And if you go to, recently Barnes and Nobles have been releasing these kind of Japanese fairy tale books, and between that fairy tale series, Lafcadio Hearn, Yae Theodora Ozaki, and the next lady I'm going to talk about, this is where most of the tales that you read come from when you buy those books from Barnes and Nobles. And last but not least, we're going to be talking about Grace James. She wrote a book in 1910 called Japanese Fairy Tales, and it's been published under lots of different names. The two that are the most popular are this one, Green Willow, Japanese Fairy Tales, and the other one is The Moon Maiden and Other Tales. But I have a copy of Green Willow, and this was very famous. One of the reasons being that it was illustrated by Warwick Goebel. Grace James also has an interesting life. I couldn't find a picture of her. If I did find a picture, I'll put it up here, but I couldn't find a picture of her in the initial research that I did. But she was the kind of last, and I know people are still translating Japanese fairy tales. I'm sure there are more modern translations, but between Lafcadio Hearn, Theodora Ozaki, Grace James, and that initial Japanese fairy tale series, this is where most of the Japanese fairy tales that you're going to read come from. So the books that we're going to be looking at today, I'm not going to show Kaidan. There's nothing really amazing in there to show, but I did take pictures of my copy of Japanese fairy tales. This is a later, probably 1930s release of the book, and it is illustrated profusely by Japanese artists. So a lot of black and white line drawings that I'll be showing off. And then, of course, we'll be looking at Grace James's The Green Willow, illustrated by Warwick Goebel. And this will blow your mind. Warwick Goebel did some amazing color illustrations that are just absolutely beautiful. So we'll be looking at those two books specifically. All right, on to the books.